Good morning again, and welcome to the big story on Business Day Television Breakfast. I am Deborah Ezeh. Today we take a deep dive into one of the most critical yet often overlooked pillars of Nigeria's economic stability, our industrial relations system. From the colonial era to today's digital economy, the relationship between government, employers, and workers has shaped not just workplace harmony, but also productivity, growth, and even our national reputation. Yet, many argue that the system, once built on dialogue and trust, is now struggling under the weight of institutional weakness, poor enforcement, and economic strain. So, how did we get here? And more importantly, how can Nigeria rebuild a fair, predictable, and productive industrial relations framework that supports sustainable growth? And joining me this morning is Adewale-Smatt Oyerinde, is the Director General of the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA, and a member of the ILO Governing Body. And he'll be joining us all the way from Switzerland. Good morning, Mr. Oyerinde. It's a pleasure to have you on the big story.
Good morning. Thank you for having us once again.
Very well. All right. Let's go straight into it. We understand that Nigeria's industrial relations system has evolved through several distinct phases, and like I mentioned in my intro, from the colonial period to the present day. Now, could you walk us through how these historical shifts have shaped the current realities that we see today?
Thank you once again. Quickly and just in summary, from the ancient of times when work was defined, was done differently, when exploitation was basically the order of the day, to the time of the Industrial Revolution, where workers became organized in the context of resisting the oppression of the employers then, to not so recent of time when we started having legislations, we started having laws and regulations. Then the influence of the ILO Conventions started playing its own definitive role in national legislation and national laws, up to the current time where we have unions as we have them currently, we have employers federation as we have them currently, and then we have other institutions within that ecosystem. The biggest difference now, or the biggest change for us now, is the standardization of those institutions. We have unions as we have them now, regulated unions, industrial unions. You have the national bodies of those unions, the NLC, TUC, NECA, which are not negotiating parties in the context of the industrial relations system. And then we have institutions that we have also created for that ecosystem, which includes the National Industrial Court, the Industrial Arbitration Panel, created to midwife issues that might arise within the context of that same ecosystem. So things have evolved significantly to where we are now. And part of the challenge for us now is this. The world of work, as we have it, has also evolved. It's also evolving. We now have the gig economy, we have the platform economy, we have people working in the cloud, we have businesses operating in the cloud. And the context of our industrial relations system doesn't really factor in those issues. And those are the critical issues. So while we have done much to address the realities of work, we have not done very well in addressing the realities of the future.
Would you say that the system still mirrors the British style model it was originally built on, or has Nigeria developed its own unique identity in terms of industrial relations?
Now, we can't rule out the influence, maybe not the British influence, but the influence of global legislation. Like the ILO Conventions, they are the basic conventions. There are 10 fundamental conventions of the ILO that guides standards and operations relationship in the workplace. So those 10 core conventions apply to all nations, irrespective of your level of development. Then we have some other conventions that are supplementary to the core conventions. They also provide guides. So irrespective of your level of development, you are expected to operate within the context of those conventions. So there will be influences of the British to colonial influence, but the ILO Conventions has played and is still playing a major role in influencing global legislation in the context of labor laws of all countries of the world, especially those that are members of the ILO currently.
All right. So, you've described Nigeria's current system as being at inflection point, fragmented and often crisis prone. Now, what do you see as the biggest challenges currently facing our industrial relations framework?
I think two or three big challenges that we have now. The first, which is of the greater concern to us, is the respect for institutions that have been created to regulate the practice in that ecosystem. For us, in the industrial relations ecosystem, crisis is given. It is accepted that there will be crisis between employers and workers. It is given that there will be crisis between government and workers or government and employers. But that same system has created institutions to regulate those crises. That same system has created laws and legislations to midwife the resolution of those crises. So non-respect for those institutions is probably one of the biggest challenges that we have. Secondly, the need for continuous education for employers, for workers, and for government, the Ministry of Labor that is supposed to regulate the relationship. The need for continuous education in the context of labor administration is also a big challenge for us. We've noticed a big gap between practitioners and legislation and global practice. And if you don't understand it, if you don't understand the basics, then the potential for you to model up the whole context of this engagement is very high.
So, we've actually witnessed frequent strikes across key sectors, like education, health, and also the energy sector. So, how much of this unrest is linked to weak enforcement of agreement or disregard for judgments from institutions such as the National Industrial Court?
A lot of them, it's quite unfortunate to find ourselves in this situation where agreements are signed and one party will willfully or deliberately treat those agreements with disdain. A key element in this ecosystem is trust. When you negotiate, you must negotiate in good faith. And when agreements are signed, it is expected that everybody must abide by those agreements. And when collective agreements are signed, it is expected that parties must respect it. When the National Industrial Court gives judgment, it is expected that parties will respect it. And for the educational sector, for many years, we've seen breaking of agreements, distrust, proliferation of agreement everywhere. And those are the key issues that we have. We must respect, all of us, the social partners, employers, workers, even government, must respect those institutions that were created to regulate issues within the ecosystem. If we don't do that, the proliferation of crises, of strikes, counter strikes, sympathy strikes, so many kind of strikes that we are witnessing that are absurd, really. They will continue to happen because we have not agreed consensus that irrespective of what happens, whatever the institutions that are meant to regulate us, whatever they say, we might not like those judgments. But once the court has placed a judgment, then it is bound on us to respect those judgments. Just the same way, if you go to the High Court, you are not satisfied, you can go to the Appeal Court. From Appeal Court, you go to the Supreme Court. Same for us. If you go to the National Industrial Court, you are not satisfied, then in some instances, we approach the Appeal Court. And whatever the Appeal Court adjudicates, then that is final. And we must all learn to live with that reality.
So, Nigeria economic challenges that talking about inflation, the removal of fuel subsidy, and the rising living cost. It has deepened tensions between workers and employers. So, how have these macroeconomic pressures changed the balance and also the tone of industrial relations today?
Our situation is not peculiar to Nigeria. Globally, check the analysis. If we fact check on ChatGPT or whatever platform now, realize most countries also have this pattern of challenges, high inflation, high cost of living is across Africa. But those are not sufficient reasons for us to disobey court orders. Those are not sufficient reasons for us to treat judgments and treat institutions with disdain. What that will do for us, it empowers us to continuously engage government constructively. It empowers us to continuously put government under pressure to sort out the issue of the macroeconomic environment so that the macroeconomic stability can translate to microeconomic stability so that people can live better lives. But flouting the law, disobeying the law, treating those laws and institutions with disdain is not really the way to go. It just moves us closer to what some have called a banana island, where anything, monkey kingdom or whatever they call it, where anything goes. And I believe strongly that is not where we want to find ourselves. Economic challenges are everywhere, and it's our responsibility to continuously give government alternative policy recommendations to say, look, yes, you are government, but you also don't know it all. These are alternative recommendations to drive the economy out of the rules. And that is what we have been doing from the perspective of the employees.
All right. There's actually a growing perception that labor unions are shifting focus from enterprise level negotiation to broader national protest. How has the traditional idea of collective bargaining lost its power in this environment?
Now, the unions can delve into the context of national development, just as Employers Federation can delve into the context of national development, because the ecosystem, the labor and industrial relations ecosystem, is not standing on its own. It's standing on the pillars of the economy itself. So when the economy is in doldrums, it affects the power of the employer to fulfill the terms and conditions of the collective bargaining. It rubbishes the purchasing power of the worker, because the minimum wage might get to a point where it's not taking him home. So our interest in national economic issues is right and valid. But in the exercise of those rights, we must also recognize that government is sovereign and government have the right to manage the economy. So to the extent or our ability to influence, to advocate, we determine how well we engage, and we also give us the opportunity to shape conversation as it is within the context of the economy. We believe strongly that data don't lie, figures don't lie, and we have based our advocacy on evidence-based advocacy, data-based advocacy that can lie. So if government say, look, the economy is ABCD, and we have data to prove that it is XYZ, then we present that to government. And most times, government have seen reason to change the course of its actions. But definitely, we have, as employers, as workers, we have the right to delve into the context of economy, but not within the scope of sabotaging the economy.
You've often emphasized that the need to strengthen institutional authority and restore respect for the rule of law in industrial relations. So what concrete steps do you think can be taken to rebuild confidence in institutions like the Ministry of Labor, the Arbitration Panel, and the Industrial Court?
It's unfortunate the way government itself has treated these institutions. We have the Ministry of Labor, that's supposed to be a very fundamental ministry in this economy. Just go to the Ministry of Labor and see the state of the infrastructure there. Go to the Ministry of Labor and see the state of facilities there. This is supposed to be one of the most critical ministries that we should have in this country, because without industrial harmony, there's nothing we can do. Without industrial peace, there's nothing like GDP growth. So government has not shown enough commitment in building even the capacity of the Ministry of Labor to fulfill its objectives. So it's when the capacity of Ministry of Labor is built, both within the context of professionalizing that ministry, providing relevant resources to the ministry to perform its many functions. The many function of inspection, many function of health and safety, occupational health and safety, many function of social security. If the people that are supposed to adjudicate, people that are supposed to arrest conflict, people that are supposed to call employers to order, people that are supposed to call workers' organizations to order, if they are not well equipped to do it, then it creates fundamental problems. So government must address the issue of equipping the Ministry of Labor, professionalizing the Ministry of Labor so that they are in a position to perform their function. Then the Ministry of Labor will now be in a position to enforce or to also empower those institutions under it so that they can perform their function effectively. We don't have any excuse, and it is not negotiable that we all must respect the Ministry of Labor pronouncement, the minister's power to arrest conflict, the National Industrial Court power to give judgment, the Industrial Appropriations power to adjudicate on issues, and the sanctity of the provisions of the Nigerian labor law. Those are not negotiable issues. And we need to empower the Ministry of Labor to be able to play that role of managing that ecosystem so that the peace that we all crave, we enjoy. If we don't do that, and the employer, for whatever reason, is far ahead of the Ministry of Labor in the context of education, context of knowledge, and context of professionalism, and if by whatever reason the organized labor is ahead of the ministry in the context of knowledge, in the context of resources, in the context of understanding of the basics of this ecosystem, then it becomes a teacher that is less educated than the student. You definitely have crisis in the classrooms. That's probably what we are seeing currently. So we need government to empower the Ministry of Labor so that that ministry can fulfill its divine objective. To surprise you that in the last 2 years, we have not had one National Labour Advisory Council meeting, probably because of resources. And the Labour Advisory Council that was fashioned in the mold of NEDLAC in South Africa, supposed to be the supreme body to adjudicate where labor issues are discussed by the tripartite and resolutions reached before it gets to strike. But that same body has not met for over 2 years because of resources. That shows how bad the situation has gotten.
So the Federal Ministry of Labor actually plays a central role in managing workplace relations, like you have mentioned. So why do you think many are yet to get it? Why do you think that is so? So and what kind of reform also do you think can support the ministry urgently to be able to function?
The first thing is government must just provide resources, must take a second look. That ministry is very, 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 very important. The current Honorable Minister for Labour and past Honorable Ministers of Labour and Employment, they've done their best in the context of a difficult environment. For those of us that are operating in that ecosystem, we know the condition in which the ministry is operating. We need government to take a second look, even a third look, and a very deep look on adequately funding that ministry to be in a position to fulfill its objectives. Once you do that, then you have set the foundation for the ministry to achieve its core objectives. Within the context of reforms, I think quite a lot has been done. We have the National Industrial Relations Policy that was launched of recent. We have many activities going on within the context of labor migration, many activities going on in the context of occupational health and safety. I think the challenge we have is not absolutely the reform issue, but implementing the reforms that we currently have. Those that we have currently, how well have we implemented? And those that we are implementing, what is the degree of commitment that social partners have to that reform that we have? It all boils down to how many view the Ministry of Labour. As I said, the ministry has performed incredibly well within the context of its own limitation. But we believe strongly that much, 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 much more can be achieved by the ministry if well funded and professionalized, as it were. The ecosystem here, the labor and industrial relations ecosystem, is not a general purpose ecosystem. It's specialized, it is definitive in nature, and it cannot be treated like one of the ministries or departments or agencies. It is driven by definitive structures, which comes basically from the ILO Conventions and recommendations, and also many other instruments that guide the operation of that ecosystem.
Looking ahead, you've recommended key reforms. That's from updating labor laws to addressing the GIG economy and enforcing essential service rules. So if you had to highlight two immediate priorities for reform, what would they be and why?
Now, the labor law has suffered some level of mishandling, if that is the appropriate word. About 2 years ago, the then Minister for State, Labor and Employment, Mr. Festus Keyamo, did a wonderful job coordinating the social partners with the support of the ILO to come up with the labor law as we have it. Where it is currently, we don't know. The last time we had it was the FEC, the Federal Executive Council approved it. Some say it's at the Ministry of Justice now. Some say it's on transit. We don't even know. That is the concern with that. So the labor law that is supposed to address those critical issues, we don't know where it is. And that is a big concern for us. And the second part is even the labor law that we have currently, not the one that is being reviewed, the current one that we have, the commitment to abide by the rule of that labor law, by the provisions of that labor law, we also have not seen it. So we also have to find a way to enforce and make sure that social partners respect the provisions of that law. There's the Trade Dispute Act that specifies what are the provisions. If there are conflicts, if there are issues, these are the steps that we must take to resolve it. We must respect those provisions. If an employer, for whatever reason, decide to take irrational actions, that the employee have provisions how we can address those issues. So we must respect those provisions so that the industrial pace that we need to achieve the $1 trillion economy that we create, we can achieve it. We have to respect those laws, and we, as quickly as possible, the Ministry of Labor, the National Assembly, must fast-track the conclusion of the new labor law so that it can pass to the president for his assent. And as we are dealing with the new labor law, the realities of the platform economy, the realities of the gig economy, the realities of hybrid work, the realities of gig work is also staring us in the face, because we are not very sure that new labor law, the new labor law, even if we have it today, we are not sure it's going to sufficiently address the issues of the new forms of work that the world is now aligning to.
All right, so finally, as a member of the ILO Governing Body, how can Nigeria align better with international labor standards while also promoting economic stability and productivity at home?
Our options are very limited because of the role we play in the ILO. I'm fortunate to be a member of the ILO Governing Body. In time past, we had Comrade Adewale-Smatt, the former president of NECA, also a strong member of the ILO Governing Body until recently. The government also, the minister, was also a member of the ILO Governing Body of recent. 2 years ago or last year, we had the Nigerian ambassador to Geneva, who was the chairman of the ILO Governing Body itself for 1 year. So our foray into the ILO, our activities participation is quite deep, that we should not be seen to be the country that is flouting ILO conventions. We should not be seen as one of the countries that when there are cases in the Committee on Application of Standard every year in the ILO, we will be struggling to remove ourselves from the list of countries that are supposed to be called out. We should not be found within the scope of that reality. But that is where we are currently. So it boils down to respecting institutions, government taking a more critical look within the context of our engagement in the ILO, and reining all social partners into place. And we must respect the conventions. We must respect the recommendations. We must respect local legislations that we created for ourselves to guide our engagement and our relationship in the labor and industrial relations ecosystem. There are no two ways to it. We just must respect the ILO conventions so that we reduce the level of embarrassment that we're currently bringing on ourselves. You know, it will surprise you how many calls we got. Even the conversation at the governing board, when people ask you, where this is happening in your country, how can this happen in your country? How are you managing this within the context of your role in the ILO? Which are embarrassing questions that sometimes we find difficult to answer.
Thank you so much, Adewale-Smatt Oyerinde, the Director General of the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA, and also a member of the ILO Governing Body. Thank you for joining us all the way from Switzerland.
Thank you for having us once again.
All right, we'll go on a quick break now. When we come back, the breakfast show continues with the social listening segment to myself and Valentine Onyeka. So do stay with us.